So, you know, oh, hi, Benny. You're good. Technology. It's changing. It's getting better. Well, I guess it's getting better in a lot of ways, maybe getting worse in some ways. I'll let you guys talk about that. The 70s and 80s technical revolution changed the recording process and the sounds that one can make. It was a revolution. The last decade's technological revolution has more to do with how people consume music than how it is made. iTunes, Google, YouTube, Facebook, smartphones have all revolutionized the way people listen, discover, and share music. Do producers take that into consideration when they produce recordings? For example, do you guys, when you're producing or when you're mixing records, do you think about iTunes separately from a CD? Do you think about how people are going to listen on their iPhone, on their laptop?
I can say I don't necessarily think about CDs versus iTunes, but when we're mixing, because people are listening on so many broad different types of devices, at least for myself, we, in studios we traditionally have these huge, insanely expensive monitoring systems, but most people don't have those in their house. The majority of people today are listening to music on little white earbuds. So for me, when I'm referencing my mixes, I definitely have to listen back on everything from these big, huge speakers to laptop speakers and the ubiquitous, iPhone earbuds, because that's where most music is getting consumed right now. So it definitely adds another layer there. I wouldn't say I think about it in terms of different delivery methods of delivery, whether you're getting it on a CD or downloading it legally or illegally or from iTunes or whatever. That part of the process doesn't change, but how I reference my music has definitely changed, for sure.
David, you were telling me about something upstairs, which you were working on, which was kind of interesting. Yeah, you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I'm beta testing. Hello. I'm beta testing some software that's a 48-channel, 24-bit, fully automated recorder with really great plugins. It runs third-party plugins. You can record 24 channels into it at once. It has full automation, 8 sub-buses. It has a 64-bit summing engine, and it runs on the iPad. And it's going to cost $49. And it has a network protocol that allows you to hook up to 16 iPads at once, and they all record. So 24 times 16. So I took it, when I started testing it, and I took it home, and I sat on my couch and I mixed something that I'd mixed on my big system that cost a lot of money. And I took it in the next day, and it made me a little sick to my stomach because I just bought a bunch of new gear, and but I still have to know how to run it and not know how to make a compressor work and that sort of thing. But it's interesting how this is a sort of a tipping point piece of technology, like some other pieces of technology that have come along. But the fact that it makes the production process more accessible to a lot of other people, it probably means we're going to be getting a lot more bad music. But it's interesting that it can be that functional as things get smaller and more efficient. I thought it was brave.
That's actually great. That you said we're getting a lot more bad music. You and I were actually having this discussion upstairs, but I think we're getting a lot of mediocre music.
That's what I call bad.
Yeah, a ton of it. And I guess that's tied into the technology, and the barrier of entry is cheaper. It doesn't cost what it used to cost to go into the studio and make records. So now everyone's making records, and that means there's more music coming out. Luke, do you think that's a good thing, a bad thing?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting quandary because on the one hand, there's a lot more to sift through as a listener, as a casual listener, also as a professional, where there's so much music out there, and like you said, the barrier of entry is so low now. Everybody, is you can record in GarageBand, where you can buy an inexpensive Pro Tools rig, and so on the one hand, there's a lot of really bad music out there. On the other hand, I think it's a really great opportunity. I think we're starting to see a lot of talent that we wouldn't hear otherwise because of the accessibility of uploading on YouTube or iTunes or Facebook or whatever. Because it's easy. You can produce something in your basement, throw it up there, and people like it. Great. If they don't, then no big deal. But I think that we're kind of in this new dawn where you don't necessarily, when I was coming up, it used to be that you got a major label deal or a big independent deal or nothing. And so it's now, you don't necessarily need conventional record labels anymore, and people can hear your music. So I think it's a good thing overall.
Benny, you agree? That it's a good thing that there's more music being created, that it's easier to get out and be a producer?
I totally agree from every aspect, from social networking to everything. Because like when I first started, Pro Tools was a lot of money. Like in Mbox, I couldn't afford Pro Tools. I didn't have my own studio till I was 20 years old. I didn't have a laptop till I was 21. So I mean, it was.
He's 22 now, by the way.
I'm 14 now. No, it's actually it's so much. I think it's more inspiring. Like there's so many programs you can get for free. There's so many I download free plugins all the time that I use more so than the plugins that I spend a lot of money on. I also think if people aren't using this technology to their advantage, then it's like they're stupid. Because it's now everyone is reachable. So say you have a dope song, okay, I want to send it to the president of Def Jam, okay? So it's like you can send it to whoever you want. If someone wants to get your contact, it's going to be really easy to get your contact. So I think it's a great thing from all aspects. And also, there's so many programs you can do things easier also than you could before, which was much more difficult. And with the mixing thing, I'm always on the go so much. I mix on my laptop a lot, just through the regular speakers. Because I think if a song's going to sound good through there, then it's going to sound good to the other people that are probably going to listen to it on there or in a Honda Civic car that has a system probably similar to that.
So if you like the way the mix sounds on your laptop, you're good with it? Or do you need to still go into the big studio and hear it on the speakers?
I definitely check on the speakers, but I can't tell you how many times I've been in the studio and when someone, level of volume is deceiving. I've been in the studio with people and you're like, oh my God, this is the best thing I've ever heard. Holy, you're like, this is crazy. And then you get home and you play it and it's like, and you're like, what the fuck? I just feel and also when you're making it, when you listen on a laptop, you have to, when you're making records, I think you have to be very conscious of it because if you're making something that's a super low frequency, no one's going to hear that. So I've had records where I've made them in a studio and it's and they're banging in the studio and then I put them on and you can't even hear the bass line and that's the lead line in the thing. So it's oh my God, I got to layer a higher one on top of that to balance it out,
I might say, when I was at Columbia Records up through into the middle of the 90s, I used to get about 50 to 60 submissions a week, and I'm getting about 40 a day now. So there's no way I can listen to all that because I still go to work and stuff. But that's the problem is it's sometimes it feels like a data dump, and you might feel like sometimes I got a tape from a band in Australia who I brought over here. But what if I hadn't listened to that? It was about 2 months ago, and I put it on, and I heard the first part, and I go, this is amazing. So I brought him over. But that does create a problem. I always have a little guilt, somebody took the time to send this to me, and I didn't listen to it. So I listened the way that they, 5 seconds at least.
Wow. So everything that gets submitted to you, you listen to?
David's email address is...
Wow. Good to know. to know. So just changing the subject for a second, because we talked a lot about we're talking about new programs and stuff. One of the things on my list that I got was, do you guys create consumer STEM mixes for new technologies that will allow people to remix your songs?
Do we upload stems for consumers?
Yeah.
I mean, I've done that before. For me, it depends on how close I am to the record. If it's something that I feel is just perfect the way it is, I won't even give the label the instrumental or the acapella. Like, I don't want anybody touching anything. It's fine how it is. But then sometimes it's cool after a certain period of time to release the stems and let the public have some fun with it. Because you doing that might serve to inspire somebody who's never done anything like that before. So you can serve to inspire somebody to become a great producer, or you also might just discover some great talent that way. And if you find something that you can take under the wing, then cool. But it really just depends, for me at least, how close I am to it. There are certain records I just wouldn't want touched, and I just know they were a part of a vision or a bigger picture, and that's that. That being said, I've also made some great records by being able to get my hands on the stems of samples or records that I would like to sample and calling a label and getting the master. It's a 50-50 thing, really, for me.
Luke, what about you? Are you okay with putting the stems up and somebody
I
touching
think it's a great idea. I mean, there's Indaba and sites like that where I think it's really cool and it engages people and it's kind of I've checked out a lot of remixes where people will take stems of well-known songs and just do really cool shit with it. So I think it's kind of cool as long as the artist is cool with it, as long as they're not selling it, and if they keep it a hobby. Obviously if they get rights to it and pay for the rights, that's great. But I like the idea of that.
I actually, on the software that I talked about, it's called Aria. And I don't have any.
You don't own it.
Yeah. We're releasing a track from the band I told you about in Australia, and it's a single, and it's actually going to be released so that when you buy that software, you get the stems with it. So it's actually, we're looking at it as if we're releasing a single, and probably everybody that owns an iPad and plays music will buy this software. And there will be mixes on SoundCloud. There'll probably end up being a page for it, and that's how a lot of people are going to find out about the band the first time. So I think it's a good idea.
Benny?
Yeah. I actually heard that they're going to start doing that. They're going to be releasing. I heard that they're trying to release smaller track albums and actually put all the other tracks with the stems on it. I have mixed opinions about it. Obviously I think it's cool. I remember when Kanye did one for I forget. I think it was like Love Lockdown or something. He just put them up. I downloaded them, but it's like it's cool. It's cool to the effect where you're getting stems, you can work with them and stuff. But it also kind of makes it. There was something like magical about when you listen to a record and you're like digging through sounds and you're like, oh my God, that one hi-hat's in the clear. Like I can grab that. Or it's like, okay, like there's this one snare drum. Oh, there's this one part where the vocal is only by itself and it's one note. And if I tune that, I can turn that into an instrument. And also, I think, how far are these stems going to, individual drum sounds? Then, also, it's kind of like, everyone will have your sounds, which isn't a bad thing because it's, how you use them. Everyone has basically the same sounds anyways, or is using a sound that they got from somewhere that is from someone else. Like, one time I was trading drum sounds with one of my friends, and I was like, those drum sounds you gave me are insane, man. And he was like, oh, those are just yours. All I did was just turn the volume up on them and put them in a different filter. And I was just like, you know what I'm saying? So, I think there's definitely cool aspects to it, but I think it's something they should perfect before they really go forward with it.
Okay. Do you guys create 192K 24-bit Pro Tools HD mixes for the coming HD music market?
Yeah, I don't really care about any of that, in all honesty. Like,
Me either.
yeah, if it's my
Yes.
thing. If it's a good record, it's a good record, and I guarantee you that 99.9% of all people are not going to be able to listen to a record and be like, that was 16-bit, that was 24-bit, and this was 8. Like, maybe you get down to 8-bit, maybe, but other than that, it's like, when I used to make records on the MPC, and then we would record them into Pro Tools at like 24-bit, 196, blah, 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 48 kilograms, whatever. And it was like, yeah, but it's a 16-bit machine. These records are coming from a 16-bit machine. Putting them in, recording them at 24-bit is not going to make them sound any better. And if you just look back at some of the biggest records, and the best records, and the most beloved records in the history of recorded music, in the industry, at least as we know it, the majority of those records were not made with that kind of technology because it didn't exist. I've put up records, when I go and get masters from, say, something like from the Stax era, or a Beatles master, or a Queen master, or something like that. A lot of these records, you push the faders up, and they sound great as it is because they were recorded well. So I think for me, what's more important is capturing the sound that you're recording well. Not so much having the highest bit rate and depth of quality. Just make a good song.
Technology can't make
Yeah.
a song better, right?
Right. Well, it's the thing. It's like, when you have that argument amongst DJs, say, for example, of Serato versus vinyl or Tractor versus vinyl. And it's just like, Serato and Tractor, these programs, they don't scratch for you. They don't mix for you. They can help you beat match, but that's about it. If you suck as a DJ, you suck. So if you're going to suck
And as a producer, too.
So if you suck as a producer or a songwriter or a singer, you're still going to suck. Then you can clean it up a little bit, get some Melodyne, some auto-tune, bring in some ghost producers or whatever. But at the end of the day, if you're not good, you're not good. And having all the machines in the world isn't going to change that. Or all the bit rates and file types, it's not going to change that.
Benny?
Yeah, HD. Oh,
Just Blaze, ladies and gentlemen.
I totally agree. I have no degree. I agree. HD. I can barely tie my shoes in the morning. It's like the way I look at it is, I just picture like Miles Davis or like Ray Charles, and they're like, holy shit, did we record this in 24-bit? They're like, they don't fucking give a shit. Like, it's like when I'm making a record, the only thing I'm focused on, I'm like, does this sound good? Sometimes, I've recorded records where we had to change a vocal. Like, we had to change, one time we had to change an entire verse on a song. And we were like, holy shit, we can't get the artist back in the studio. They're on the road. They have no studio bus. Like, this was before they got, they got big. I'm like, what are we going to do? And he's like, well, sometimes when I record demos, like, I just record them through the actual microphone in GarageBand. And so we literally just took the person just sang the song into the microphone in GarageBand, and then we put it in the song, and that's how it came out. Like, so I mean, the whole technology and the way you get there, I don't think matters. I just think what the end product sounds like. Because honestly, I can't tell the difference between 16 and 24-bit, because every sample that you use is a 16-bit sample. So if you use any drum sounds, it's a 16-bit drum sound, because you're getting it, someone probably took it off a CD, or it's an MP3, or even some shittier quality that I don't even know about. And that's the charm about records, though, to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is, if I wasn't so lazy, I'd still record the tape. I mean, I love the way it sounds, but I kind of like what these guys are saying. Whatever the protocol is, I'll follow it. Whatever the mastering guy ends up sending out, it's fine. I mean, I record 48, 24-bit now, but like Just Blaze was saying, it's like people are hearing it on 16-bit anyway, so it kind of ultimately doesn't matter. As long, like you said, man, it's a good song, it's a good song, good production's a good production. People are feeling that. They're not, they don't really care about the resolution. I mean, there's some audiophiles out there who are insane and have crazy ears, or they're imagining that they are hearing things, but yeah.
Most of them think they have crazy ears, but they really don't.
Yeah,
That's
I
what
agree.
think.
David?
I agree. The first record I produced for a major label was a band called Pearl Harbor and the Explosions, and nobody would sign them So we made a little 7-inch with two-sided 7-inch. I made the record in 6 hours, including mixing, and we rehearsed for 2 weeks though. And it went. Both sides went #1 at FM crossover radio. Rock radio. And so then all the labels came back like hungry dogs. You guys are amazing. All the money went up. We ended up signing with Warner Brothers. And the guy said, well, this is going to sound great when you remake this, because, I go, but it was already #1. That's just not bright enough. Well, could we turn the high end up? No, you have to get a real engineer. Well, I know I'm not a real engineer, but okay. So I had to recut it, and it sucked. And we did it in September, but when we cut the original stuff in January, the band actually liked each other. By September, they hated each other's guts. So we finished the album. It cost $150,000 instead of the 6 hours, and it stiffed, and the band broke up. That was a big lesson for me. There's no such thing as a demo. You could use it off the laptop.
Luke, you mentioned something about tape, and if you weren't so lazy, you'd use tape. Any of you guys bounce your mixes to tape before mastering, or?
Yeah, I sometimes work with these guys. They're called the Dap Kings, also the Manahan Street Band. So,
We have some fans here.
what they do, they don't even have a computer in their studio. It's only recorded to tape, and then we have to get the actual tape, bring it somewhere so we can transfer it back to Pro. It's a pain in the ass. It sounds really good, but I only do it when I'm with them. I'm not going to be like, we need to send this whole mix through tape. It actually, when you're doing it to like vocals and stuff, it actually doesn't sound. What it does is it dulls it. It makes it less bright for me. But I think it's awesome when you have time to do it. But it really is like a process.
But you can hear the difference.
And you can hear a difference. There's a natural compression that also happens when you record the tape. There are some high-end audio devices, or audio interfaces rather, that are using a lot of these same parts that they're using these tape machines. So sometimes what I'll do is, if I want something to have a little bit of a heavier, fuller sound, I'll get like a Burl AD converter or something like that, and record my passes back through them, because that's probably the closest you're gonna get to having something sound like it's hitting tape without actually hitting tape. You would definitely hear the difference. I think it's a bit heftier. Like I said, there's more of a natural compression. It's not as bright. But I also think that there are a lot of techniques that we can use in today's digital world to replicate that sound to a certain degree. But there is nothing like recording the tape, but it gets very prohibitively expensive and time consuming. And there's a trade-off. And like I said, for me, it goes back to, is the record good or not? I can record it to official price tape deck. If it sounds good, it sounds good.
Waiting for those tape machines to align, right?
Well,
God.
Big fun.
I did was recording with Paul McCartney at his studio in the south of England, and he has the tape machine that they used for Sgt. Pepper's, and it's in perfect condition. His tech guy is the guy who was the assistant on Revolver. This is as old school as you can get. And I thought, oh my God, I was nervous, and we were going to do this. Put the tape up, everything was amazing, and put it in there, and it didn't sound as good as what we did on the computer for the 2 songs that we were doing. So it's just a matter of choice. It was noisier. You couldn't hit it with the headroom and stuff. So I think it's just a matter of what sounds right for the situation you're in.
When producers used to go in with artists, a lot of times they would, at least when they were thinking in a commercial sense, they would think, how's this song going to sound on the radio? So many artists and so many songs are coming through with big syncs, advertising, Chevy, Bud Light, big movie syncs. You can see as soon as you get a sync how it affects the iTunes sales. Do any of you guys ever think about when you're making a song, and I don't know if it's...
Every second.
Yeah.
Every moment.
Yeah.
Sync's kind of the new radio.
Got it. So you guys will think about that.
There are sometimes, I don't necessarily go into a record with that in mind, but I think sometimes when I'm working on certain records, it can kind of hit you like, yo, I can see this in a Chevy commercial, or I can see this in an Apple ad, or I can see this wherever and you might, I don't necessarily make the record for that, but I think there's a certain moment where you can tell. And, it might change your approach once you realize what you have. You might not want to make it a 6-minute song anymore. You might want to make it, 240. Great for radio, great for, and great for advertising. So there's certain decisions I might make once I realize that the potential is there. But I've never gone into it saying, I want to make a record that's going to be in the next such and such movie. I've never done that before.
Yeah, I've actually never thought of that ever in my life. This is actually the first time I've actually ever thought of it, just now when you said that.
I corrupted Benny Blanco.
I mean, I'm never just like, holy shit, I got to get this in the next Tampax commercial. Like, I'm just like, I mean, if you're making a song and it's good enough, it's going to get synced everywhere. Like, if you have a big song or you have a song that people really like, I don't mean big, like commercially big. If you have a song that's like, where someone's just like, the people picking these aren't stupid. Like, if it sounds like it should be good for something, someone's gonna be like, "Oh, that should be good for this," I definitely don't wake up every day and think, "How can I make this song work for a sync?" I'm like, "How can I make the best song and get the whatever's inside of me onto that as quickly as possible, so I don't forget it."
And that's really the best approach because, like you said, if there is a good song or that fits a certain scene in a movie or the feel for a trailer or whatever, I've had records that have gotten picked up that I did 6 years ago that are just being used for something now, And you wonder, you're like, why would somebody want this record? It's old, it never really went anywhere, but it was the perfect fit for that scene. So bottom line is you put your all into it, good music finds its way out one way or another.
Yeah, I just finished a record, and I was lucky enough to write most of the songs with the artist, and it was kind of what was interesting about it was as the songs, once we got in the studio, as the songs started to develop, we were kind of looking at each other on one of the songs like, this is like a great car ad song, I mean, this is like lyrically, the feel, the whole thing, and it was kind of inadvertent. But then as, we were kind of halfway through the production, and as, I was still producing, I was kind of thinking in terms of that, but without, whoring myself out or sacrificing the track for it. It was sort of in the back of my head. And then, as we started talking about that, there were a few other songs we were like, yeah, this could actually kind of work on, this kind of thing and that kind of thing. But it wasn't like, paramount in the production or in the songwriting, but just kind of like, I think, like we just said, where it's like, hey, really good songs, the advertisers are going to, if they're speaking to people, they're going to speak to advertisers.
I think that I don't think you should write songs about Chevys or tampons, but I think that you should, when you make a song that sounds great and you've made something on your own and you're not signed anywhere, you should have as many connections to sync people as you do anywhere else. And I think it's another avenue for somebody that's looking for placement. Just one other thing, I'm sorry. The thing is, it's more like a singles market when you're shopping for sync. And since it's a singles market now, because you can have 10 songs, but really one song is going to be what happens first. And that's why I think it's interesting to think about sync, because it's a very specific use for a song. And an advertiser might take something you wouldn't think was right for them, and they might use it. But when you're making a track, it's good to think about singles, and it's a natural fit with sync for film, TV, or ads.
So you're talking about singles. That I have a question for you guys. So, when you used to decide what you were going to work on in order of, hey, this is what my month's going to look like. I'm going to go in with this artist, and we're going to work on this album. Now that we are back at a singles market, how long do you stay with the same artist? Do you worry about the whole album, or are you more dividing up your time to do the singles on the artist and move around? Like, how long is your creative process now with an artist? And do you look at it as, I'm going to go in and do, 1, 2, 3 singles, or I'm going to make the album, or?
The last thing, and I think this is for me, at least this has benefited me and probably hurt me in some ways. The last thing I want to hear when the artist walks in is, yo, we need to make my single today. There's been times where I've heard that and I'm like, yo, never mind. I'm cool. and I know some artists personally that I've worked with or been friends with over the years where I feel like that method or that train of thought is actually what killed their careers. Because instead of concentrating on a good body, I feel like if you have a good body of work, the singles will gravitate. They'll come. You know, but when you go in, like I'm starting my album today and I'm going to do 3 singles in 3 days, you know, it's just like, dude, just concentrate on making a good body of work. Concentrate on making the best work you can do, you know, and the singles will come. Like, any big record that I've ever had, my entire career was never forced and never intentional. They just came about, you know, and that came from us starting an idea, saying, oh, yeah, this sounds cool, let's finish it. Oh, this doesn't work out too well. We scrap it, you know, we keep going. And if I don't end up having the single on the album, cool. You know, as long as I just like to have records that stand out, you know, and stand the test of time. And for me, that's the most important thing, really. It doesn't need to be on the radio 8 zillion times a day, but if it happens in the process, great. Yeah, so be it.
Luke?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I'm still a great believer in an album. And, I think that I've done, you know, a fair amount of singles, and at least from my perspective, I like to go in and, like, make a body of work and, you know that, hey, these 3, 4, 5 songs might, you know, hit radio. But I like to, you know, I like album tracks, too. I mean, I always find that my favorite songs on most records that I've grew up loving, and even stuff I listen to now, are oftentimes, you know, album tracks. But at the same time, you know, I've done some singles, and it's cool. It's sort of a whole different perspective from a producer standpoint, where you're like, okay, you know, if you're showing up with this song, I got to make the song as badass as I possibly can, and make it as, you know, whatever you're going for, commercial or whatever, as I can. But, you know, you know, if I have my choice, I like making records. I like doing 10 tracks, 12 tracks. Yeah. Thank you.
You go first. I don't know what to say yet.
Okay. I think that the way that the labels are structured now, the major labels, it's my impression that they tend to create more of a focus on a single and more of a paranoia about not having one. A lot of the times for majors, people aren't getting deals until they have essentially a single because they've got so many hits on YouTube or they got sync somewhere, and then all of a sudden everybody's trying to sign them. And even that is no guarantee because they're still going to test market this single in the different ways that they do it through call-out research or something. And in the last few years, I've seen this thing that I call overpay and walk away, where at the last minute, like an eBay auction, everybody comes in and the price goes way up. Then they work it for a few weeks, and when it doesn't take hold, they move on to another single. And because it's so single-oriented in terms of the way that the marketing takes place, because they need the money back so quickly, you know, they're on a quarter, it feels like a quarter system, and probably will be quarter-hour system pretty soon, that's focused within that structure on singles. And sometimes, as far as I can tell, on a lot of albums, a couple of songs probably get 80% of the budget. So, but it's a reality of the way that part of the business is structured. I don't think it's that way outside of that business, but, and personally, I work with artists that make albums, but it's always nice to have a single.
Benny?
Well, everyone said everything good already. I just focus on making music. I don't know. Nothing ever works when I'm just like, all right, this is it. We got to make the #1 single. Like, then I always make a shitty song, right? And whenever I've ever pitched anything like to a label, like I've never placed a record by pitching something to a label ever in my entire life. But I mean, I guess just focus on making a good song and, like just said, something that just stands out. Like, I just want to make something completely different than anyone else would make. And if it's on the radio, it's on the radio. If it's not, I mean, obviously we want it to be on the radio. But I also think, like, I want people to start caring about album tracks again. Like, very rarely is there a time now where I just put on a new album and listen to the whole thing. It's like, because a lot of times what it is the singles will be big songs, and then the rest of the album is just shitty songs from people who tried to make singles that weren't singles. So it's like, oh, that song's almost a single, and it's like, oh, like that they probably got a single from that guy, so they had to buy another shitty song because he said he won't give them the single unless they bought another one. Like, and it's not as cohesive, you know? I feel like also when less producers work on an album, it sometimes sounds better because it's like, it's not just like, okay, that's a rap song, that's a polka song, like that's a jazz song. Like, it just sounds completely different sometimes and like incoherent. Yes.
You've all gotten great performances at big artists. That's a difficult thing to do. Artists are almost as complicated as producers, and almost as difficult to deal with. How do you get the best out of an artist?
One thing I will say about that, I've noticed that the more successful artists that I've worked with are usually the easiest ones to deal with in terms of criticism, shaping them, or just giving your input to the record. Probably because they're the most secure, because they've already succeeded. They've succeeded already. And I also think that that's part of what makes a great artist is being able to accept criticism or be produced. And I used to tell people, like, I'm not here to make a beat. You can go get a kid with Fruity Loops and give them $2,000 to make a beat. If you want to make a record, that's a different story. But I will say one of the key things also with me for that is I always say the music business in general is majority people skills. And, sometimes with certain artists, I have that rapport. Like, say, if it's me and Jay in the studio, I can say to Jay, that was whack, do it over. You know what I mean? Or just those last 2 lines or whatever. And he'll be like, okay.
And he takes that. And
He's
wow.
like, he'll take it from us. He'll take it from me. He'll take it from Guru. He might just take it from a random dude that walks in the room. But we have a rapport of knowing each other for over 10 years. Certain other artists, I got so comfortable with certain people. Some other artists, I would like take that approach, and then they would kind of just make this look like I was nuts. And then I'm like, oh, I don't really know this person like that. And you have to realize, one thing that I had to realize is sometimes you have to give them the negative and the positive. It's something like, instead of just saying, those last 2 lines are terrible, it might just be like, oh, the rest of the verse is great, but those last 2 lines need to be changed. You know what I mean? It's all in the way you phrase it. But really, it's just really interesting to me how the most successful artists are usually, the easiest to work with in that respect. Newer artists who maybe feeling themselves a little bit, had 1 or 2 hit records, on the radio or in the club, all of a sudden just they're on top of the world and they don't want to hear anything from anybody. And that's when I've had to tell a couple of them, like, I don't have to, I'm here to produce, I'm not here to make beats. If you want somebody that's just going to make a beat and walk away, then just call somebody else.
How do you get the hits out of them, Benny? When you have an artist in there, how do you get, you've had some incredible worldwide records. How do you get that out of them? How do you pull it?
Drugs, lots of drugs. That's usually no. How do we do it? Don't ever force anything. Like sometimes, say we're in for a week. Sometimes we won't even get to writing till like the 4th day. That usually makes the label upset, but it's like, sometimes we're like racing against the wire and it's like the last like 2 hours and we're like, fuck, we gotta do it. And then, but you can't force it. Sometimes you just okay, we can't get it right now. Let's go eat food and play ping pong or something. It's like, yo, let's just relax. Like, it's music, it's creativity. Like, it's not like a job. If it was like that, like, and it was just like, today you have to do that, you have to write 2 hit songs today, like, then no, you're not going to do it. I mean, sometimes you might, but working with an artist, I mean, a producer, you're pretty much a therapist. So it's like, half the time you're just like, it's okay. What?
I can't hear you. What'd you say?
I think he called me an asshole.
Console?
you say Neve console or asshole?
I thought he called me an asshole. Thank you.
I thought I heard ham is in the console.
It's a good guessing game. What did that guy say? Anyone else want to take
I can't even hear him. I'm sorry. No, but I mean, like I said, you're just like a therapist. Like, you have to pick your battles. Sometimes you're gonna be like, it's gonna be like, okay, I really know this part is not the right part, but in my head, I'm like, let's do the entire thing. Then we'll loop back around and we'll be like, hey, you know. And sometimes they do it on their own. When that happens, you're just like, yes. Like, but then there's those times like, you know, sometimes you got to be an asshole. Like, I've had songs where we literally rewrote just the lyrics to the song 7 times. It took us like 12 days. We rewrote, and it was a big song. But it's like, you know, sometimes you got to pick your battles and you got to know when to really stick to your guns.
Luke, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, I mean, these two guys are right. I mean, except for one instance, the most established artists I've worked with are always the easiest in the studio. They've done it before. They're pros. They've usually been around. I mean, they've been around long enough. The reason why they're around long enough is because they're pros. And like Benny said, you know, we got to be psychologists and psychiatrists and babysitters and everything. And, you know, what's that? And a punching bag, yeah. And yeah, you know, I mean, sometimes like I've got a rule in the studio where it's like, you know, I'm gonna live with your idea if you live with mine till the next day. And you know, it just might be, you know, might be like, you know, a terrible idea, and I know it's a terrible idea, and I know that the next day we're not gonna like it. But you gotta play that. You gotta give your artists a lot of confidence. I mean, that's really the name of the game. They gotta feel good about making their record. They gotta feel comfortable in the studio. They got to feel like, you know, they can trust you and that your judgment's great. And, you know, that's the name of the game, really, when it comes down to it.
Yeah, I'm just going to play off just really quickly. Like, that's one thing I forgot what you said was sometimes you might have to spend 3 or 4 days just not even doing anything musically. Just building a rapport with that person, getting to know them, and getting them comfortable with you. It's probably cardinal rule number 1. Everything else comes after that.
Totally. Like, the music is like the least of it. It's like I won't even work with someone unless I've met them before and made sure they're cool or something. Because who knows? Maybe you get in with the artists and they're big. Maybe they're a murderer and they're going to kill you. Like, I don't know. So I got to get in and make sure the situation's good. You know, there's a lot of massaging. Like, when it's like massaging the whole situation. And I'm actually really blunt, though. That's my worst thing. Like, I'll be like, like he said, I'll be like, no, that's awful. But I mean it in the best way. Like, I would want someone to tell me, like, that really sucks. You should redo that part. Because, I mean, there's no feelings when you're in the studio. There shouldn't be. Egos should be left at the door.
But there always are.
There always are. Dum, 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 dum.
David, egos left at the door in the studio?
Nope. They come rocking right in. I think that, like, one of my basic rules is I never criticize someone without recourse. So I might not know what's going on, but it doesn't sound right, but I don't tell them that doesn't sound good without being able to say, try this. And I had this experience with the band Sublime. And we were doing their album, and there was a song called What I Got. And I had a beat and a acoustic guitar track, and Brad didn't come the first day, and then he came the second day, and he took about 9 bong hits and walked in and stared at the speakers and walked out. And then he came back the next day, and I kept working on the track, and when he'd listen, and he'd kind of go like that, and then finally I got it to a point where he said, okay, that's all. It was nothing talking. I just kept working on it, and then he went like this, and he went out and sang it twice. It was on the 5th day, and that was it. We used the second take except for 2 words. But it would be different for, say, when I did Tony Bennett, or, you know, each person, you have to figure out how to make it work, and every one of them is massively different.
Did you want to say something, Benny?
No, I'm just eating the microphone.
Okay.
You know, there's a little. David, I've been a big fan of David's for a long time and his work, and I remember in the late
I love
90s.
that song.
David's killer, by the way, David Kahne. And I won't name the band, but he made a record in, I guess, the late 90s, and I remember the song was huge, and it was like this really breezy California song, and it was all very, you know, it was cool, and then, you know, the vocal was great, and the production was great, and I go see the band live, and I'm like, those guys can't fucking play, the guy can't sing, and I'm like, that's insane that this guy got that out of them in the studio. And I just remember distinctly, like, just that moment, just really realizing, because I was just coming up, and I was working with East Village bands and doing the whole thing, and just kind of really, truly understanding, like, you know, I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen bands live, and you're like, wow, their records sound amazing, and, you know, the vocal, the guy sounds like he can sing on the record, and you go see him live, and they're terrible, and the bass player is terrible, and the drummer can't, you know, keep a groove, and you kind of, that's what producers do. And so we're stuck in a studio with a drummer or a guy who can't sing, and we're kind of like, man, we got to make this work, and it's really, really hard. It's, you know, we're kind of like in the firing line. We got the label, the band, the management, everybody's staring at us. Make this record happen. It's got to sound great. And that's not easy. Even with all this technology, even with autotune and Melodyne and all this stuff, it's still hard to make someone who can't sing sound like they can sing. So that's why we gotta do that and also be psychiatrists. So it's a pretty hard job.
I have 5 stages of every project: inspiration, despair, search for the guilty, punishment of the innocent, awards to everybody not involved.
Well, that's a good way to wrap up the producers movement. I want to thank Just Blaze, Benny Blanco, Luke Ebbin, and David Kahne. Thanks a lot, guys. Really appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have a few questions, we have time for about 15 minutes of questions, guys, if you don't mind. And there's a young lady there in the front center aisle. If you want to walk up to her and ask any of the panelists a question, please do.
David,
This
would
light's so bright.
would you please repeat the 5 stages? That's too good. I got to repeat it. I'll give you credit, but I got to write it down.
Inspiration, despair. That happens pretty fast, that part. Search for the guilty, punishment of the innocent, awards to everyone not involved.
And when you email him your track, he's going to send that right back to you, so you don't need to write it down.
Hello, my name is Åsa. I have a question when it comes to using real instruments versus not using real instruments. And when you don't use real instruments, I wonder if you don't think that you miss a level of inspiration and originality that you get from the interaction with the instruments itself. For example, when you play a mellotron, you play very differently to the hard keys and pitch bender than you would if you just had the sounds. And I know mellotron is a bad example since it's the sampler itself.
I think it really all depends on what's up here. You know, and it also depends on certain sounds. I think some sounds are easier to replicate than others. Guitars are getting increasingly better. Strings have come along a bit, but brass is still very hard to duplicate very well. Why plugins? I think you don't agree. Okay, your opinion. You know, but I think it really just comes from what's up here, and also depends on the artist. If you have an artist who's, for me, who's a guitar player, yes, it would make no sense for them to be sitting there at a keyboard playing a guitar patch, because the guitar is probably part of the essence of their artistry. But if that particular instrument isn't necessarily central to that artist's artistry, then it probably doesn't make much of a difference. Also, I think just through years of playing synths and software libraries, it's also a matter of knowing how to pull the best of those sounds out. You know, you could give all 4 of us the same string patch, and we'll probably all approach it a bit differently. You know, I feel like there are some people who are really good at taking these plugins and making them sound like real instruments, and then there are just some people who aren't.
Yeah, I don't even know how to use software at all, or MIDI, neither. I think it's a good balance though, because I mean, so I don't use that. I only use like older vintage keyboards, maybe a few new ones. But I mean, I think it's just, like you said, it depends on which artist you're working with, depends on what you're doing. But I always like to throw in weird sounds that just don't make sense in the song too, just to keep it inspirational for me. Like, I'm like, okay, let's put a saxophone in this song and like where a synth line should be. And like, I don't even know how to play saxophone that well, but thanks to technology, I can pretend I can play. You know, like you can play one note. I don't play guitar that well. I play one note at a time. Then I go back, play another note on top of it, then go back and play another note on top of it till it's a chord. I'm glad you guys are making fun of my guitar.
I thought I was the only one that did that.
No.
I do the same exact thing. I'll either that or just tune the guitar to E and then just strum the hell out of it.
Yes.
I've had experiences. I do scoring, and sometimes, and I have a very elaborate orchestral setup, bunch of computers, all the libraries, and I'll work on an arrangement for a long, long time, moving, say, pizzicatos by milliseconds at a time, and moving the basses early, the way that the bass players have to play, early in an orchestra, and then sometimes go in and have an orchestra play it, and it's not as good. And it's not just the sound, it's the timing. I couldn't get the timing, I can't get it into the cracks. And that's a very disappointing moment. There was one where there was 50 players and the main instrument was a clarinet. And I had this amazing clarinet sample that was just as dry and as somber as possible. And the guy that was playing sounded like he was in Guy Lombardo's orchestra. And so it was wiggly, and all of a sudden it turned into a carnival piece because of this one guy. And we had to end up not using the orchestra because of that guy until I asked him to not play, and then which was hard. And then we had to use the sample. And so I find it's more about the expression of the composer and the arranger, where that stuff is going to sit and how it's going to lay. It's a very, very subtle game. Generally, I like acoustic instruments. I think they're the best. Sometimes they don't work as well.
Also, my experience with things like that, where I've composed something and then had an orchestra play it back afterwards, you realize you're dealing with, anywhere from 12 to 50 different musicians, slightly different interpretations of where they should be playing versus what is in your head. So, that being the case, they might not even realize why it's not right or sounds wrong, because to them it may be in perfect time, but we're not necessarily thinking about perfect, we're thinking about what feels good.
And then they get attitude at you and you try to tell them not.
I actually like when an orchestra does it, because the whole beauty of the orchestra is that every single person's not in time. So when I actually make string parts at my house, I'll tune one of the notes like completely, like just a little bit off. Then I'll like have this one just a little bit late so it sounds like it's live. Or like when I'm doing when I'm programming drums at my house, I'm like, okay, like this hi-hat, it should be a little bit to the left, because if this dude was playing it, like it would probably be to the left. Or like this dude's kind of fumbling like at that kick drum. Until I figured that out, like my kick drums would sound like so robotic, and it's like, okay, I got to turn the velocity down on this one so it sounds like he's like just getting into it,
But that's what we're saying. So it's like that's what's in your head.
Yeah.
And sometimes I try to relay that to a huge group of musicians.
Oh yeah, trying to do that, But then it's also good sometimes, because then sometimes I'll have a drummer play something, and then I'll go back and just replace it with samples to exactly where his parts are.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on I've been in situations where I've recorded a 32-piece orchestra, and actually my string mock-up, that I did on my Giga sampler, or even just like standard strings might sound better in the track than the live orchestra. It just depends.
Yes, this question is for Joey. Being a president of a major label, does it also sometimes help when a new artist is presenting themselves of who the producers are that's working with them?
Yeah, well, if I'm a fan of a producer and they take the time, to work with a new artist, that is an important sign to me that the artist is probably talented, because it's hard to get one of these guys time, and yeah, it's definitely helpful.
You also spoke a little bit about the prevalence of sync in breaking new music or breaking your music or being a big portion of the success of music these days. I was wondering, and I'm sure many other people might be thinking along these lines, there are so many new independent artists doing things on their own, especially with technology making it possible. What advice would you give to these people who don't have the connections you have to get potential sync deals?
Hello? Don't focus on that. Go play shows. Go get people to know who you are. Go give people your music for free. Go put it on SoundCloud. Go get on blogs. Go do this. All that's going to come if you have good music and you have people who care about it. Like right now, like labels are scared shitless. They're like, what? We can't sign this artist. What do you mean they don't have 5 million plays on their YouTube? What are you talking about? Like back in the day, it was like, okay, that artist is good, cool. Like now it's like
not
like,
every label, Benny.
Not everybody, but a lot of people. They're like, how many Twitter? The first question I hear: how many Twitter followers do they have? How many subscribers do they have on YouTube? How many people can they fit in a room if they do a show in New York? You know, and I mean that's the reality of it now. So I mean, I feel like if you are a new artist, those are the type of things you should focus on. Getting big in your own community first. Then it's all word of mouth. Then a producer might hear you or this or that. You go.
Well, I was going to say, I've been involved with some guys who are people that they're a sync company, and they're actually starting a label. And they're going to find music that they can sync and then put the album out through RED. So there's a lot of different, there's actually 2 other big sync companies that have both started labels and publishing companies. And I think that those businesses are going to start fracturing out, and they'll be more susceptible to taking music because they know if they get the sync, and then they can put out the music and help develop that artist. And I think you're going to be seeing more and more of that.
I know there's like a couple of agencies that have sprung up over the past few years who are kind of specializing in these things, like taking relatively unknown music and trying to push it for sync. I don't remember their names offhand. If you research that, you can probably find out who they are. But I agree. At the same time, like that's like the age-old question of how do you succeed as an artist? And the solution changes every few years. But I think the one thing that doesn't change is if you can become successful in carving your own niche out in your own area where you're from, whether it's New York or Tennessee or whatever, they'll come to you. You know, it will take time, but they will come to you. You know, we've seen it time and time again with artists like Jay-Z, Cash Money, Nelly. You know, people, obviously Jay's from New York, but some of these other guys were from areas that at a certain point in time weren't really significant in the music industry. You know, and they created their own industries. So make it happen where you're from, start your own movement, and, you know, the rewards will come if the music is good.
Yeah, I mean, you can also, you know, there's the old adage of throwing everything against the wall you can and see what sticks. So you can develop your Twitter following, your YouTube following, and, you know, create new music all the time. And just, I mean, you can, you know, I know there's some supervision companies that try to listen to everything they get emailed to them, and you just, you know, because kind of like we were talking about earlier, you just never know what you might miss. And I know supervisors feel that way, and supervisors are kind of like what DJs used to be like, you know, back before it was like you wanted to be like the first on it. So if you're like a supervisor and you've got this badass track from some band from, you know, Tulsa, and, you know, the sync is cheap, next thing you know it's on an Apple ad, you're like the shit. You know, that's the top-notch music supervisors. So, so you can, I just do everything you can.
All right, well, thank you, guys. Our time now really is done. That's the end of the Q&A, and that's the end of the producers movement. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to start the opening night party.